His name was Kareem. At least that is what the man sitting across from him at the restaurant believed. That belief had been carefully constructed over 11 months of Tuesday evening dinners weekend. Football matches watched on bar screens in the particular companionable silence of two people who have watched enough games together that commentary is no longer necessary, and the kind of slow, unhurried conversations that happen between people who have stopped performing for each other and started simply existing in each other as company. The man across from him was David. David was not a high-ranking official. He was not a decision maker or a policy architect or anyone whose name appeared in the organizational charts that intelligence services spend resources mapping. He was a mid-level analyst at a government contractor whose specific technical function gave him access to a narrow but operationally significant category of information that three separate collection efforts had failed to reach through any other available method. He was not important in the way that famous people are important. He was important in the way that a specific key is important when it opens a specific door. Kareem had been positioned in David's life through a process that began 8 months before their first conversation. That first conversation had happened at a 5A-side football game organized through a community sports app. Kareem had appeared as a new player needing a team. David's team had needed a player. The apparent coincidence of timing had been arranged with the precision of a process that left no visible seam. Within 3 games, they were exchanging numbers. Within 2 months, the Tuesday dinners had begun. David had introduced Kareem to his wife at a barbecue in the 4th month. Kareem had remembered her name, had asked about her work at a subsequent dinner, had remembered a detail from that answer 3 weeks later, and followed up on it with a specific attentiveness that marks a person who listens not to respond but to remember. David's wife had told David afterward that she liked Kareem more than most of David's friends, that he seemed real in a way that a lot of people did not. She was not wrong about that. The quality of presence that Kareem brought to every interaction was not performed in any theatrical sense. It was the product of preparation so thorough and practice so sustained that it had become genuinely natural. The interest he showed in David's opinions was calibrated, but it was not false. The laughter was real. The warmth across the dinner table was real. The friendship and every experiential dimension that David or his wife could access was completely real. What was not real was its origin. What was not real was its purpose. What was not real was the fact that everything Kareem knew about David before their first conversation, his football habits, his professional frustrations, his specific sense of humor, the particular quality of friendship he had been missing since his closest friend from university had relocated 3 years earlier, had come from a file rather than from the organic accumulation of shared experience. David did not know any of this on the evening of the 11th month when, over the remains of a dinner that had run to hours longer than either of them planned, he mentioned something about a project he was working on, a technical detail he would not have mentioned to a colleague, would not have mentioned to his wife, mentioned to Kareem because Kareem was the person in his life he trusted most completely, and that trust had been the operational objective. From the first Tuesday evening football match 11 months earlier, Kareem listened, remembered, said nothing that revealed anything about what he was, and the following morning, he filed a report. The phrase fake friendship, when applied to intelligence tradecraft, carries a misleading implication. It suggests something obviously hollow, a performance so transparent that the only question is why the target failed to see through it. The word fake implies a detectable falseness, a quality of simulation that leaves visible gaps between what is presented and what is real. The technique this video is about is not fake in that sense. It is something considerably more sophisticated and considerably more unsettling than a performance. It is the deliberate construction of a genuine human relationship for an operational purpose that the other party never knows exists. The friendship is not fake in its experience qualities. It is real laughter, real warmth, real attentiveness, real investment in the target as a person. What is fake is its foundation, its origin, the reason the operative showed up in the target's life in the first place, and the invisible purpose that every subsequent act of genuine warmth has been serving. Intelligence professionals refer to this technique across different agencies and different eras by various operational names: friendship cultivation, relationship development operations, social access programs. The terminology is institutional and clinical and strips from the technique almost all of the human weight that makes it worth understanding at a deeper level. Because what this technique actually represents, beneath the operational language, is the systematic weaponization of one of the most fundamental human experiences: the experience of being genuinely known and genuinely valued by another person. Blackmail requires a target to know they are compromised. Coercion requires visible pressure. Ideological recruitment requires a target to consciously choose a new allegiance. All of these methods leave the target with some awareness of what is happening to them, however unwilling or constrained their response might be. The friendship cultivation technique is unique among recruitment methods because its most effective deployment leaves the target with no awareness at all, not just unaware of the operational purpose, but actively convinced of the opposite, convinced that what they have is one of the most genuine relationships in their life. That conviction is not incidental to the technique. It is its central mechanism, because a target who believes in the friendship will do things to maintain it that no amount of external pressure could compel them to do, will share things that no direct question would ever extract, will lower professional guards that years of security training have built precisely, because the relationship in which they lower those guards does not register to them as an intelligence context. It registers as Tuesday evening dinner with someone who knows them well, enough that professional performance isn't necessary. What we are going to examine today is how the conviction is built from the ground up, how the friendship cultivation technique works at every stage, from initial profiling through sustained relations, hip management. What makes it consistently effective against people who are, in their professional lives, among the most security conscious individuals in the world, and what it reveals about human connection that a technique built on its simulation can produce the genuine article so reliably that the target cannot distinguish between them. The friendship was real in every way David could measure. The question this video is going to answer is how that becomes possible and what it costs everyone involved. Before we go any deeper, I want you to think about your closest friendship. Not a professional relationship or a family connection, but a genuine friendship. The person who knows the specific texture of your humor, who remembers things you mentioned months ago and asks about them unprompted, who you would tell something to that you would not tell a colleague or even a family member, because the relationship exists in a register that feels safer and more honest than those other contexts. Now think about the origin of that friendship, how it began, the specific circumstances that put you both in the same place, the early conversations that established the sense that this was a person worth knowing better. And think about how much of your current trust in that person rests not just on who they have shown themselves to be, but on the story of how they came to be in your life at all. Most people trust their closest friendships partly because of the relationship itself and partly because of the narrative of its origin, because it began in circumstances that felt organic, because neither of you was trying to get anywhere in particular when you first met, because the relationship arose from the world rather than from anyone's design. Now ask yourself this: how would you know the difference? How would you identify from inside a friendship that felt completely genuine in every experiential detail, that its origin had been designed rather than accidental, that the circumstances that brought you together had been arranged rather than random? Comment below with the word David if the question makes you think differently about a friendship in your own life, not with paranoia, but with the specific unease of realizing that the answer is not as obvious as it should be, because what this video is about to show you is that from the inside, you would not know. And understanding why that is true changes how you think about trust itself. The friendship cultivation technique does not begin with a person. It begins with a blueprint. A detailed operational document that identifies not just what the target knows or what access they have, but who they are as a social and psychological entity, what they need from friendship, what they have been missing, what kind of person they respond to most openly and most trustingly, what conversational register makes them feel most genuinely seen. This blueprint is constructed through a research phase that intelligence services treat with the same rigor they apply to technical collection. Operations open source intelligence establishes the public contours of the target's life and professional background. Human reporting from peripheral contacts provides texture about their personality, their social habits, their current friendship landscape, and the specific gaps within it. Behavioral observation, direct or mediated, builds a picture of how the target actually moves through social environments versus how they present themselves in professional ones. The output of this phase is what operational planners use to design the operative's presented identity. And here is where the technique becomes genuinely sophisticated in a way that distinguishes it from simpler forms of social deception. The operative is not designed to be universally appealing. They are designed to be specifically appealing to this particular target in this particular moment of their life. The football game in Kareem and David's case was not randomly chosen as a meeting environment. David's participation in Community 5A side games had been identified as the social activity where he was most relaxed, most accessible, and most likely to form the kind of easy, unstructured connection that develops into genuine friendship. The football context bypassed the professional social registers that David maintained carefully in work adjacent environments and placed both parties in a context where social performance was low and authentic personality was high. The environment was chosen because it was the one where David was most completely himself. The operative as presented identity is then calibrated to the specific friendship template that the target is most likely to find compelling. Psychologists studying friendship formation have identified that the most enduring friendships are typically built not on general compatibility, but on specific resonance. The experience of another person reflecting back a particular dimension of your own personality or experience that most of your other relationships do not fully access. The brilliant friend who matches your specific intellectual register. The one who shares the precise quality of humor that most people around you do not quite get. The one whose experience of the world overlaps with yours in ways that feel specific enough to be meaningful rather than broad enough to be generic. The friendship cultivation operative is positioned to provide exactly that specific resonance for this particular target, not to be broadly likable, but to be precisely the kind of person that this individual, given everything the research phase has established about them, will experience as unusually compatible. The apparent coincidence of finding someone who fits so specifically is part of what makes the connection feel significant. The target does not think they are lucky to have met a nice person. They think they are lucky to have met exactly the right person. And that sense of specific rightness is what accelerates the development of trust, past the pace at which ordinary friendships typically build it. By the time the first significant disclosure occurs, the relationship has been developed to a depth that feels years old rather than months old. That compression of trust development is not accidental. It is the intended output of every operational decision made in the months preceding it. Constructing the initial friendship is the first phase of the technique, sustaining it across months or years, while simultaneously extracting operationally relevant information, without the target ever perceiving an intelligence dynamic as a significantly more complex challenge and one that distinguishes amateur social manipulation from professional cultivation. Operations. The central psychological problem of sustaining a cultivated friendship over time is this. Genuine friendships develop in ways that are genuinely mutual. Each party influences the other. The relationship changes both people involved. There is an organic unpredictability to how real friendships evolve that cannot be entirely scripted in advance, because it depends on the authentic responses of to actual human beings interacting without a controlling agenda. The cultivation operative must manage this dynamic without suppressing it. A friendship that never evolves organically, that remains at exactly the emotional register it was, and in its early stages without deepening in the ways that real friendships deepen, will eventually feel static to the target in a way they may not be able to articulate, but will register as a subtle wrongness. The operative cannot rigidly control the relationship's development. They must guide it while allowing it to breathe, must manage its trajectory while allowing genuine moments to occur within that trajectory. This requires a form of sustained dual awareness. That represents one of the most psychologically demanding aspects of this category of work. The operative is simultaneously fully present in the friendship, genuinely responsive, genuinely warm, genuinely engaged, and simultaneously maintaining an operational awareness of where the relationship is in its developmental sequence. What information has been accessed, what disclosures have been made, what the next operational stage requires. Intelligence professionals who study this technique describe what they call the authenticity paradox. The cultivation operative, who tries to manage every moment of the friendship consciously and deliberately, produces a relationship that feels slightly managed, slightly controlled, slightly less alive than genuine friendship. The operative, who allows genuine engagement to occur, who permits real moments of connection and real personal investment, produces a relationship that is operationally more valuable precisely because it is less controlled. But less controlled means the operative themselves is more genuinely involved, and genuine involvement, and carries its own operational risks. The other critical mechanic in sustaining a cultivation operation over time is what intelligence professionals call information gradient management. The target must feel that information flows freely between them and the operative, that the friendship is one of genuine mutual openness. But the operative is simultaneously managing what they appear to disclose very carefully. Personal information shared by the operative must be detailed enough to feel genuine, emotionally specific enough to invite reciprocity, and verifiable enough in its surface elements to survive any casual checking. But it must not be true in its operationally relevant dimensions. This creates a disclosure architecture where the operative appears to share openly, while actually controlling the information environment of the entire friendship. The target experiences mutual vulnerability. The operative is managing a one-sided intelligence relationship from behind the appearance of a two-sided human one. The target has sensed that they know the operative as a person, as one of the most carefully constructed elements of the entire operation. Because a target who feels they know their friend deeply is a target who trusts that friend completely. And a target who trusts completely does not apply operational scrutiny to what they share. David did not feel like he was being questioned on the evening of the 11th month. He felt like he was talking to a friend. Here is the truth about friendship cultivation operations that operational reports are structurally incapable of capturing, and that public discussions of intelligence tradecraft almost never reach. The operative, across the months and sometimes years of a sustained cultivation relationship, does not remain emotionally neutral, cannot remain emotionally neutral, is not, in fact, supposed to remain emotionally neutral. Because emotional neutrality produces the quality of managed presence that targets eventually register as subtly wrong. The operative is selected for and trained to deploy genuine human warmth. They are trained to listen with real attention, to care with apparent authenticity, to be present in ways that feel genuine because, in the moment of their expression, they are genuine. The warmth that David experienced across 11 months of Tuesday dinners was not a performance in the theatrical sense. It was warmth that was actually felt, in the moment of its expression, by the person expressing it. The interest in David's opinions was real interest. The laughter was real laughter. The investment in David as a person developed across 11 months of sustained and genuine human contact into something that the operational language of intelligence work has almost no vocabulary for. Former operatives who have worked in sustained cultivation operations describe, with a consistency that cuts across different agencies and different national contexts, a specific and largely unacknowledged dimension of this work: the relationships they build for operational purposes were, in many cases, among the most genuine human connections they formed during their operational careers. Not because they forgot what they were doing, but because genuine human engagement, sustained across sufficient time, between the people who are both authentically present in the interaction, produces genuine connection regardless of the asymmetry of intention behind it. This creates a psychological condition for the operative that has no clean institutional category. They care about the target in the ordinary human sense of caring, while simultaneously being the instrument of a process that will eventually harm the target in ways that the target has no capacity to protect themselves from. The warmth is real. The operational purpose is real. Both exist simultaneously in the same person across every dinner, every football match, every conversation that the target experiences as friendship and the operative experiences as something they have no single honest word for. Intelligence services have historically framed this psychological complexity as a management challenge rather than a moral one. The operative must maintain operational discipline while permitting sufficient genuine engagement to sustain the relationship's authenticity. The emotional entanglement that sometimes develops is treated as a risk to be managed, a variable to be monitored, rather than as evidence of a human cost that the work generates inevitably. But the operatives who carry these operations across years and then carry the memory of them across the rest of their lives describe something that the management framework does not adequately account for: the specific weight of knowing what the target never knew, of having been genuinely known by someone in the way that only a close friend knows you, while simultaneously knowing that the version of yourself the person knew was built for a purpose they never consented to, of having received genuine trust and having used it as a collection instrument. Kareem filed his report the morning after that 11th month dinner. He wrote it with a professional precision that his training had built over years. And then he sat for a while in a way that the report did not record and that the institutional culture surrounding his work had not prepared him to process. David had called him his best friend the previous evening. He had said it easily, the way people say things that are simply true. You have never cultivated a friendship for intelligence purposes. You have never built a relationship from a target profile or managed a disclosure architecture. Across months of Tuesday evening dinners, the operations described in this video are conducted by trained professionals against specific high-value targets in specific institutional contexts that are remote from ordinary life. But the mechanics of what makes the friendship cultivation technique work are not remote from ordinary life at all. They are built on features of human connection that every person who has ever formed a genuine friendship has experienced from the inside, and recognizing those features in an extreme operational context makes them more visible in the quieter context where they operate every day. Think about what actually produced your trust in your closest friendships. It was not a rational assessment of the other person's credentials or a deliberate evaluation of their reliability across a test period. It was a felt experience, the experience of being listened to with specific attention, of being remembered, of finding in another person an unexpected specific resonance that felt like more than coincidence, of the relationship developing a history and a texture that made it feel irreplaceable. None of those experiences require the other person's intentions to be what you believe them to be. They require only that the other person is genuinely present in the moment of each interaction. And genuine presence, as the cultivation operative demonstrates, does not require honest foundation. It requires only that the moment itself is real, regardless of what architecture preceded it or what purpose it is serving. This is the uncomfortable truth that the friendship cultivation technique reveals about human trust in general. We trust our most important relationships not because we have verified their foundations, but because we have experienced their surface with sufficient depth and consistency. That questioning the foundation feels unnecessary. The experience of being genuinely known by another person is so specifically powerful that it tends to satisfy our need for connection completely, without generating the residual skepticism that would prompt us to examine the conditions under which that experience was produced. That is not a design flaw in human social cognition. It is what makes genuine friendship possible at all. The same openness that makes us vulnerable to cultivation operations is what makes us capable of the real thing. You cannot have one without the other. The question is simply whether the person you open yourself to was there for the same reasons you were. Most of the time, they are. Most of the time, the Tuesday evening dinners are just Tuesday evening dinners. Part 8, the 3 stages intelligence professionals studying and conducting friendship cultivation operations have identified 3 distinct stages through which every successful operation of this kind must pass. Each stage has its own psychological logic, its own specific risks, and its own operational requirements. Understanding these stages changes how you read the development of any relationship, whose origin circumstances, on reflection, seem slightly more precisely timed than pure chance would predict. The first stage is called the access window. Every friendship cultivation operation begins by identifying and entering the specific environment where the target is most socially accessible and least professionally guarded. This is not simply the environment where the target spends the most time. It is the environment where they are most completely themselves, where the social register is most relaxed, where the professional identity that governs their working hours is least present. For some targets, this is a sporting context. For others, it is a creative or intellectual community. For others, it is a neighborhood or domestic environment where professional presentation is simply not relevant. The operative enters this environment with a covert identity and a purpose that are entirely consistent with that environment and makes initial contact in circumstances that feel entirely natural to the target precisely because they are calibrated to the specific social texture of the space. The access window stage ends when a regular pattern of contact has been established, and the target has begun to experience the operative as a consistent presence in their personal, rather than professional world. The second stage is called the depth investment phase. This is the longest stage of the operation and the one that determines whether the cultivation succeeds or plateaus. The operative systematically deepens the relationship through the mechanisms of genuine friendship, specific attentiveness, graduated disclosure, the construction of shared experiences and anchor memories, the demonstration of reliability across small tests that the target administers unconsciously, rather than deliberately. The depth investment phase cannot be rushed without producing the subtle static quality. That target's register is something being slightly off. It must develop at a pace that feels natural given the relationship's apparent history. The operational patience required is significant. The intelligence value produced at this stage is typically ambient rather than specific. Contextual information about the target's professional environment, rather than direct access to sensitive material. This changes as the relationship deepens. The third stage is called the trust harvest. This is the stage that the preceding months or years of investment have been building toward. By this point, the relationship has developed to a depth where the target experiences the operative as someone they can speak to with a freedom they do not extend to colleagues, or even to family members in some cases. The trust harvest does not typically involve direct requests for sensitive information. Direct requests would register as a category change in the relationship. That would trigger exactly the professional suspicion that the cultivation has been designed to circumvent. Instead, the operative creates conversational environments where the target volunteers information naturally in the register of normal friendship conversation, without experiencing the disclosure as anything other than ordinary talk between people who know each other well. The information travels not as intelligence, but as conversation, not as a transaction, but as trust. By the time it reaches the operative's report, the target is still thinking about whether to have the same restaurant again next Tuesday. Intelligence professionals studying and conducting friendship cultivation operations have identified 3 distinct stages through which every successful operation of this kind must pass. Each stage has its own psychological logic, its own specific risks, and its own operational requirements. Understanding these stages changes how you read the development of any relationship, whose origin circumstances, on reflection, seem slightly more precisely timed than pure chance would predict. The first stage is called the access window. Every friendship cultivation operation begins by identifying and entering the specific environment, where the target is most socially accessible and least professionally guarded. This is not simply the environment where the target spends the most time. It is the environment where they are most completely themselves, where the social register is most relaxed, where the professional identity that governs their working hours is least present. For some targets, this is a sporting context. For others, it is a creative or intellectual community. For others, it is a neighborhood or domestic environment, where professional presentation is simply not relevant. The operative enters this environment with a covert identity and a purpose that are entirely consistent with that environment, and makes initial contact in circumstances that feel entirely natural to the target precisely, because they are calibrated to the specific social texture of the space. The access window stage ends when a regular pattern of contact has been established and the target has begun to experience the operative as a consistent presence in their personal rather than professional world. The second stage is called the depth investment phase. This is the longest stage of the operation and the one that determines whether the cultivation succeeds or plateaus. The operative systematically deepens the relationship through the mechanisms of genuine friendship, specific attentiveness, graduated disclosure, the construction of shared experiences, and anchor memories, the demonstration of reliability across small tests that the target administers unconsciously, rather than deliberately. The depth investment phase cannot be rushed without producing the subtle static quality that targets register as something being slightly off. It must develop at a pace that feels natural, given the relationship's apparent history. The operational patience required is significant. The intelligence value produced at this stage is typically ambient rather than specific. Contextual information about the target's professional environment rather than direct access to sensitive material. This changes as the relationship deepens. The third stage is called the trust harvest. This is the stage that the preceding months or years of investment have been building toward. By this point, the relationship has developed to a depth where the target experiences the operative as someone they can speak to with a freedom they do not extend to colleagues or even to family members in some cases. The trust harvest does not typically involve direct requests for sensitive information. Direct requests would register as a category change in the relationship. That would trigger exactly the professional suspicion that the cultivation has been designed to circumvent. Instead, the operative creates conversational environments where the target volunteers information naturally in the register of normal friendship conversation, without experiencing the disclosure as anything other than ordinary talk between people who know each other well. The information travels not as intelligence, but as conversation, not as a transaction, but as trust. By the time it reaches the operative's report, the target is still thinking about whether to have the same restaurant again next Tuesday. David found out on a Wednesday morning, not through any dramatic revelation, not through a confrontation or a surveillance operation that closed around him with visible machinery. He found out through a conversation with a security official who had been quiet and professional, and who had placed a photograph on the table between them without theatrical emphasis, and simply asked if he recognized the person in it. He recognized Kareem. The security official told him what the photograph meant in careful, measured language. The name that was not Kareem. The employer that was not a consulting firm. The 5A side football game that had not been a coincidence. The Tuesday dinners that had been, from their first instance, a collection operation. The 11 months of friendship that had been, from its designed origin to its operational conclusion, a professional process. David sat with this information for a long time before he said anything. The security official, who had delivered this kind of information before, recognized the specific quality of the silence. It was not the silence of someone processing a security breach. It was the silence of someone trying to locate something they had believed was in one place and discovering it was not there. What David described afterward in the interviews that followed was not primarily the feeling of having been deceived in any institutional or professional sense. What he described was something more interior and more difficult to process than that. He described the experience of having the last 11 months of his life reframed around him. While he sat in a room that smelled of institutional coffee and looked at a photograph of a man he had called his best friend, he described going back through those 11 months in his memory and trying to find the moments where the friendship had been visible as a construction rather than as a real thing. He could not find them. Every memory he accessed felt exactly the same as it had felt when he first formed it. The laughter was still laughter. The conversations were still conversations. The warmth of those Tuesday evenings was still warm in his memory in the same specific way it had always been, and he described finding this impossible to reconcile. Because if none of the moments felt false in memory, and none of them had felt false in experience, then in what sense had any of it been false? In what sense had the friendship been fake beyond the clinical sense that its purpose was not what he had believed? The warmth he had felt was real. The warmth he had perceived from the other side of the table was real in its expression. The 11 months of consistent, specific, genuinely attentive human presence was real as a human experience even if it was not real as an autonomous relationship. This is the specific cruelty of the friendship cultivation technique that no other form of intelligence deception produces in quite the same way. It does not leave the target with memories that feel false. It leaves them with memories that feel completely real and a context that makes those memories impossible to simply inhabit anymore. The experiences themselves are untouched. The meaning of them has been retroactively removed. David still had 11 months of genuine Tuesday evenings. He just no longer knew what they had been, and that not knowing, he said later, was harder than any of the rest of it. Kareem's operation was eventually reconstructed in full. Every stage of it was documented with the retrospective clarity that post-compromise investigations bring to the process as they examine the initial profiling, the selection of the football environment, the calibration of the presented identity to David's specific friendship template, the developmental sequencing across 11 months, the trust harvest on the evening that produced the disclosure. All of it was visible in the documentation, each decision logical in the context of the previous one. The whole sequence coherent and precise in a way that made it look, from the outside and in retrospect, almost inevitable. What was not in the documentation, because documentation is not built to contain it, was anything about what those 11 months had cost the person who conducted them. The operational file recorded outcomes. It did not record what Kareem carried out of that operation when it concluded, whether the Tuesday evenings had remained purely instrumental across their full duration, whether the man who had called himself Richard to a lonely analyst by a library computer had found it easier or harder than Kareem found it to file his report the morning after being called someone's best friend. These are not questions that intelligence institutions are structurally equipped to ask. They are questions that the human beings inside those institutions carry in private. The friendship cultivation technique is, at its operational core, the systematic use of human connection as an intelligence instrument. It works because human connection is real and powerful, and produces genuine psychological effects regardless of the intentions that underlie it. It works because the experience of being genuinely known by another person is one of the most significant experiences available to human beings. And that significance does not diminish because the circumstances that produced it were designed. It works because trust, once formed through consistent, genuine engagement, does not routinely subject itself to the question of whether its foundation was what it appeared to be. These are not weaknesses in the people it is deployed against. They are the features of human social experience that make genuine friendship possible at all. The same openness, the same capacity for accelerated trust and specific resonance, the same instinct to protect relationships that have become important. that make people vulnerable to cultivation operations are exactly the qualities that allow human beings to form the deep connections that make life genuinely meaningful. You cannot engineer away the vulnerability without engineering away the capacity. They are the same thing. What you can do, which is the only practical thing this video is ultimately offering, is carry a specific and modest awareness, an awareness of origin, of timing, of the relationship between your state of social need at the moment a significant friendship began, and the precision with which that friendship appeared to address exactly what was missing. Not suspicion, not the corrosive paranoia that would make genuine friendship impossible. Simply attention. The kind of attention that asks, not of every relationship, but of the ones that matter most. Whether the story of how it began holds up to the same quality of scrutiny that everything else you care about receives. David held up his end of every Tuesday dinner for 11 months. He was present, open, genuine and trusting in the way that people are with the friends they value most. The most important thing the friendship cultivation technique reveals is not how to protect yourself from it. It is how much we need the thing it imitates.